I had lived in my parents' basement apartment for almost 6 years. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, it wasn't because I couldn't afford my own place. Quite the opposite. The arrangement had started after my father's back surgery. They needed help maintaining the property, and I needed a temporary place while saving for a house. The basement had its own entrance, kitchen, and living area, so it felt more like a separate apartment than living with my parents. At first, everything worked well. I paid $950 a month in rent, helped with repairs, shoveled snow in the winter, mowed the lawn in the summer, and handled most of the maintenance issues around the duplex. Whenever something broke, my father called me before he called anyone else. Over time, however, I began noticing a pattern. Every extra dollar my parents had seemed to disappear into my younger brother Ethan's latest business opportunity. Ethan was 30, too, and had never kept a steady job for more than a year. According to him, regular jobs were for people who lacked ambition. He was always chasing the next big thing. First, it was a food truck, then a cryptocurrency startup, then an online fitness brand, then a custom sneaker company. Every venture ended the same way, with unpaid bills, excuses, and my parents writing another check. My mother called him an entrepreneur. I called him a professional failure, but saying that out loud never ended well. Ethan just needs one good break, Mom always insisted. Success takes time, Dad would add. Meanwhile, I worked 60-hour weeks as an accountant, carefully saved every bonus, and watched them throw money into what felt like a bottomless pit. One Friday evening, my mother knocked on my apartment door. "Can you come upstairs?" she asked. Something in her voice felt strange. When I entered the dining room, both my parents were already seated. Dad had his hands folded. Mom refused to make eye contact. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" I asked. Dad cleared his throat. "We need to discuss the rent." My stomach tightened. "The rent?" Mom finally looked up. "We've decided to increase it." I expected maybe $100. Inflation had hit everyone. "Okay," I said carefully. "How much?" Dad slid a piece of paper across the table. I stared at the number, $1,900. For a moment, I thought I had read it wrong. Then I looked again. No, $1,900. Exactly double what I was paying. I laughed nervously. "That's a joke, right?" Neither of them smiled. The room suddenly felt much smaller. "You're serious?" "It's still below market rate." Mom said, "Below market rate." I repeated. For a basement apartment, Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Property costs have increased." I knew that wasn't true. I handled finances for a living. Their mortgage hadn't changed significantly. Their taxes had gone up slightly, but nowhere near enough to justify doubling my rent overnight. Something didn't add up. "This isn't about property costs," I said. Mom crossed her arms. "Why would you say that?" "Because I knew my parents, and because Ethan's latest business had launched 3 months earlier. A luxury coffee subscription service. The kind of idea that sounded impressive until you realized nobody wanted it. The website looked expensive. The marketing looked expensive. Everything about it looked expensive. And Ethan had exactly 0 experience running a business. Suddenly, the timing made perfect sense. You need money for Ethan. Silence. That silence told me everything. Dad looked away first. Mom's face hardened. "Family helps family," she said. There it was, the truth. I felt something inside me crack. "You're doubling my rent to fund another one of Ethan's disasters. Watch your tone," Mom snapped. My tone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've paid rent on time every month for 6 years. I've fixed this property. I've helped whenever you've asked. And now you're treating me like your personal ATM because Ethan can't manage money." Dad sighed heavily. "He just needs one more chance." One more chance. The phrase echoed through my head. I had heard it my entire life. One more chance after the food truck failed. One more chance after the crypto crash. One more chance after the fitness brand collapsed. One more chance after every mistake. Always one more chance. Never accountability. I stood slowly. "If that's how you feel, then fine." Mom seemed surprised by my calmness. "You can afford it." Maybe I could, But that wasn't the point. I looked at both of them and realized they genuinely believed this was reasonable. That hurt more than the rent increase itself. Without another word, I walked downstairs. Later that night, while taking out the trash, I passed the kitchen window and heard my parents talking. "We'll have enough to keep Ethan afloat another few months," Mom said. Dad sounded worried. "I hope so." I froze, then quietly kept walking. The next morning, I started searching for a new apartment. And that same afternoon, while sorting old paperwork, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local bank. I almost ignored it. Then the voicemail arrived. "Hello, this is Karen from First National Bank. We need to discuss an urgent matter regarding the mortgage on your parents' property. Please call us as soon as possible." I stared at the screen. Why would the bank be calling me about my parents' mortgage? I had no idea, but I was about to find out. I called the bank first thing Monday morning. The voicemail had bothered me all weekend. I assumed it was a mistake, but curiosity and a growing sense that something wasn't right kept nagging at me. After navigating the automated menu, a woman answered. "First National Bank, this is Karen speaking." "This is Daniel Carter," I said. "You left me a voicemail about my parents' mortgage." There was a brief pause as she searched for my information. "Mr. Carter, thank you for calling. Before we continue, I need to verify your identity." After confirming my name and date of birth, Karen sighed. "I apologize. It appears you're listed as the emergency financial contact on the mortgage file. We attempted to reach your parents several times, but haven't received a response." My parents never told me they listed me. It looks like the authorization was signed years ago during a refinancing. That caught my attention. "I'm afraid I can't disclose confidential account details," Karen continued, "but I can tell you we've been trying to reach the homeowners regarding an urgent matter." "What kind of urgent matter?" "I'm sorry, sir. I can't discuss that." The call ended politely, but my stomach was in knots. Refinancing, my parents had always bragged about nearly paying off the house. Dad loved telling people another few years and we'll own it free and clear. Had that been a lie? That evening, I walked upstairs to return a package that had been delivered to my apartment by mistake. The front door was slightly open. I heard raised voices from the kitchen. "We're out of time," Dad said. "I know we're out of time," Mom shouted back. Then Ethan's voice joined in. "The investors are interested. I just need another month." "You said that last month," Dad replied. "They're waiting on paperwork. Excuses, always excuses." I quietly set the package by the door and started to leave. Then I heard words that stopped me cold. "If we miss another mortgage payment, they'll start foreclosure." Foreclosure. My heart pounded. I stood frozen outside the doorway. Mom began crying. "We've already refinanced 3 times. Dad answered in a tired voice I'd never heard before. "There's nothing left to borrow." 3 times, the puzzle pieces suddenly fit together. Every time Ethan's business collapsed. Every expensive investment. Every mysterious financial emergency. My parents hadn't been using savings. They'd been borrowing against the house, again and again and again. I quietly went downstairs before anyone noticed I had heard. For the first time in my life, I felt something stronger than anger. I felt pity, not for Ethan, for my parents. They had spent decades convincing themselves he was one lucky break away from success. Instead, they'd buried themselves under mountains of debt. And now they expected me to help dig them out. I opened my laptop. Instead of searching for explanations, I searched for apartments. This time I wasn't looking casually. I was looking seriously. By Wednesday, I had toured 3 places. By Friday, I signed a lease on a modest 2-bedroom apartment 15 minutes away. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. No family drama, no guilt, no surprise rent increases, most importantly, no Ethan. Over the next 2 weeks, I packed slowly. Since I worked during the day, I moved boxes a few at a time after work. Strangely, no one asked questions. Mom barely noticed. Dad was constantly on the phone. Ethan came and went at odd hours, usually bragging loudly about meetings with potential investors. One afternoon, I saw expensive coffee machines being loaded into a van. Business is booming, Ethan announced proudly. The moving company logo on the van told a different story. They weren't delivering equipment, they were repossessing it. Even then, he refused to admit defeat. Finally, moving day arrived. I carried my last box upstairs and placed my apartment keys on the kitchen counter. Mom looked surprised. "What's this? My keys? What do you mean? You doubled my rent. So I found somewhere else to live." Dad looked up from a pile of unopened bills. "You're leaving today," Mom frowned. "You can't just leave." "I just did." "What about helping your brother?" I almost laughed. Even now, even after everything, that was still her first concern, not asking where I'd live, not thanking me for years of paying rent. Not apologizing, just Ethan. "I hope his business works out," I said calmly. Then I picked up my final suitcase. As I reached the front door, Dad spoke quietly. "You're making a mistake." I turned around. "No," I replied. "I'm finally stopping one." For a long moment, no one said anything. Then I walked away without looking back. Life in my new apartment felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't constantly buzzing with requests to fix a faucet, lend money, or rescue Ethan from another crisis. I slept better, worked better, even smiled more. Then, exactly 17 days after I moved out, my phone buzzed again. It was my neighbor from across my parents' street. His text contained only one sentence and a photo. "Thought you should know." I opened the image. A bright orange legal notice had been nailed to my parents' front door. Across the top, in bold black letters, were the words, "Notice of foreclosure proceedings." I stared at the screen in silence. The collapse I'd overheard in whispers had finally become public. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The orange foreclosure notice stayed on my mind for days. I wanted to tell myself it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd moved out. I'd built a peaceful life away from the constant drama. But no matter how much distance I put between us, they were still my parents. Then my phone rang. Mom. It was the first time she'd called since I moved out. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello." Her voice was shaky. "Daniel, we need to talk." I already knew why. "I've got a feeling this isn't about missing me." Silence. Then she whispered, "Can you come over?" When I arrived that evening, the house looked different. The lawn hadn't been mowed. The flower beds my mother usually kept spotless were overgrown with weeds. Even the porch light was burned out. Inside, the atmosphere felt heavy. Dad sat at the dining table, surrounded by stacks of unopened envelopes. Mom looked exhausted, as though she hadn't slept in weeks. Ethan was pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear. "No, listen," he shouted. "The investment is coming. I just need another extension." He hung up and noticed me. "Perfect timing," he said with a grin that looked painfully forced. I didn't smile back. "What happened?" Dad rubbed his forehead. "The bank won't give us any more time." I glanced at the foreclosure notice lying on the table. "So, it's official." Mom nodded, tears filling her eyes. "They're taking the house." For a brief moment, I genuinely felt sorry for them. Then Ethan spoke. "It's not over." Dad looked at him. "Ethan, my investor is flying in next week." I stared at him. "You've been saying that for months. This time it's real, just like the last 5 times. His face darkened. "You've never supported me." I laughed bitterly. "I've supported you my entire life." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I paid rent that helped keep this house running, while Mom and Dad poured everything into your businesses." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go." "No," I said calmly, "here we go." For the next hour, everything that had been buried for years finally came out. I reminded them about every failed business, the food truck, the crypto company, the sneaker brand, the luxury coffee subscription. Every single time my parents had rescued Ethan. Every single time they'd expected me to quietly accept it. Dad finally admitted the truth. We believed one of them would succeed. And to make that happen, I replied, "You refinanced this house 3 different times." No one answered. Because they couldn't. The silence was all the confirmation I needed. Mom reached across the table. We made mistakes. I nodded, you did, but we can fix this. I already knew what was coming. She took a deep breath. If you help us catch up on the mortgage, there it is. Dad leaned forward. You've saved money, yes. You could loan us enough to stop the foreclosure. Ethan quickly added, just temporarily. I looked at each of them. None of them had asked how I was doing. None had apologized for doubling my rent. None had acknowledged how they'd treated me. They simply wanted my savings. Again, I folded my hands together. No. The room went completely silent. Mom blinked. No. I won't give you my savings. Dad's voice hardened. So you're just going to watch us lose everything? I took a slow breath. No. I've already watched you lose everything. You lost it every time you chose Ethan over common sense. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. So you're punishing us? I'm protecting myself. Family helps family. I looked directly at him. Interesting. Where was that philosophy when my rent doubled? No one spoke. When I worked weekends while you chased another dream, silence. When Mom called me selfish because I wouldn't invest in your coffee company. Still silence. I stood. You don't need money. They looked confused. You need accountability. As I walked toward the front door, Mom began crying. Please don't leave. I stopped for a second but didn't turn around. I didn't leave this family. My whole life. You left me every single time you chose your favorite child. Then I walked out. 3 weeks later, the foreclosure auction took place. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Some blamed the economy, others blamed bad luck. Only a handful knew the real story. The house sold. For far less than it had once been worth. My parents were given 30 days to move out. Ethan disappeared almost immediately. His phone went straight to voicemail. Apparently, he had moved in with a friend across town. The same brother who had promised to save everyone couldn't even stay to help pack boxes. I wasn't surprised. Golden children rarely shine when the spotlight disappears. A month later, I was sitting in my apartment after work when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. Hello, Mr. Carter. Yes, my name is Lisa. I'm the real estate agent handling the foreclosure sale of your parents' property. My heart skipped a beat. I believe I have an opportunity you may want to hear about. I leaned back in my chair, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Whatever she was about to say, I had a feeling it was going to change everything once again. I wasn't sure why a real estate agent would be calling me about my parents' house, but curiosity got the better of me. I'm listening. I said, the agent, Lisa, spoke in a calm, professional tone. The foreclosure auction has been completed, but the sale didn't attract many bidders. The property sold well below market value. The current buyer backed out due to financing issues, and the bank is looking for a qualified purchaser who can close quickly. I frowned. I'm not sure why you're telling me this. Because your name came up during the file review. Based on public records and your financial history, you appear to be in a position to qualify. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 6 years of living below my means, countless overtime shifts, skipped vacations, old cars instead of new ones. Every bonus check deposited directly into my savings account. While my parents had been borrowing against their home, I had quietly been building my future. Lisa continued, if you're interested, the bank is willing to sell at a significant discount. I looked out the window of my apartment. The irony was almost unbelievable. The same house I'd been priced out of by my own parents could now become mine. Over the next week, I met with the bank, reviewed the paperwork, and hired an inspector. The house needed work. The roof was aging, the plumbing needed repairs. Years of financial stress had caused my parents to postpone maintenance. Still, even after accounting for repairs, it was an incredible opportunity. I signed the papers. 2 weeks later, the bank handed me the keys. Not as a tenant, as the legal owner. I sat alone in the empty living room for several minutes. This wasn't how I had imagined owning my first property. There was no excitement, no celebration, only a strange mixture of sadness and relief. I hadn't won. My family had lost. My parents still had 1 week left before they needed to move out. I knocked on the front door. Mom answered, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked exhausted. What are you doing here? She asked quietly. I came to talk. Dad joined us in the hallway. So, did the bank send you? I shook my head. No. I held up the key. I own the house now. Neither of them understood at first. Then Dad's face turned pale. You bought it. I nodded. The bank accepted my offer. Mom covered her mouth. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, she whispered, "We lost our home, to our own son." I looked at both of them and answered gently, "No, you lost your home long before I bought it." I could have been cruel. I could have demanded they leave that afternoon. I could have reminded them of every insult, every unfair comparison, every time they chose Ethan over me. Instead, I did something they never expected. "You can stay until the end of the month." Mom looked surprised. "You mean that?" "Yes. I'll even hire movers." Dad lowered his head. "I don't deserve that." "No," I replied honestly. "But I deserve to live without bitterness." For the first time in years, my father cried. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears of regret. "I'm sorry, son." Those 3 words were ones I'd waited decades to hear. They couldn't erase the past, but they mattered. Ethan returned 2 days later, not to apologize, to ask if he could move back into the house. "You own it now," he said, "so it shouldn't be a problem." I smiled politely. "No." He blinked. "What? You've had enough chances." He laughed nervously. "Come on, we're brothers." I looked him straight in the eye, and brothers don't spend years expecting everyone else to pay for their mistakes. He muttered something under his breath and walked away. That was the last time I saw him for nearly a year. Over the next several months, I renovated the duplex. I repaired the roof, updated the plumbing, painted every room. The basement apartment where I had once lived became a beautiful rental unit. Soon, both apartments were occupied by respectful tenants. The rent covered the mortgage, maintenance, and left me with steady monthly income. Ironically, the same property my parents had nearly lost chasing quick success became the foundation of my financial security because I treated it with patience instead of desperation. Almost a year later, Mom asked if we could meet for coffee. She looked healthier. Dad had taken a part-time job to rebuild their savings. They were renting a modest apartment across town. Ethan finally found steady work. She said, "A regular office job." I smiled. "Good." She stirred her coffee before looking at me. "We spent so many years trying to save one child that we forgot to appreciate the other." I didn't answer right away. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. Finally, I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "I can't change the past, neither can you, but we can decide what happens next." She nodded, tears filling her eyes once again. "Sometimes people ask if buying my parents' house was my revenge. They're wrong. The house was never the revenge. The revenge was refusing to become bitter. It was proving that hard work, patience, and self-respect would always outlast favoritism, excuses, and empty promises. My parents spent years believing the golden child would save the family. In the end, the child they overlooked was the one who quietly rebuilt everything. And as I stood on the front porch of the home I now owned, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold, I finally understood something that had taken me a lifetime to learn. The sweetest revenge isn't watching the people who hurt you fall. It's rising so high that their choices can no longer hold you down.